Hello, everybody that signed in so far, and I know people are going to sign in as we go along. Today, welcome to our 22nd event in the ICSVE series of Zoom panel discussions, discussing various issues of terrorism and violent extremism. And we're excited to once again have 150 professionals signed up for today's event. I think they're still signing in because we don't have 150 yet, but we'll see. And we got people signed up from all over the world, United States, Europe, some from, including from Spain, we had a high representation. From the Philippines, I'm always impressed that people stay up for our events. Welcome. Nigeria, South Africa, Singapore, another one staying up late. Welcome. Finland, Serbia, Pakistan, and many other countries. And Molly and I and TM did get some feedback when we put our report out from other militaries around the world, including from India, that these were important issues to consider, so this is not relating only to US military. In our last event, we featured Ambassador Peter Galbraith, who's also one of our ICSVE advisors, who spoke about his work helping to repatriate women and children from ISIS camps in Northeast Syria, and in particular about a little girl that was rescued in a quite amazing operation. She's now back in Tennessee, and there's going to be a hearing next week about who's going to have custody of her, either her aunt or her paternal uncle. We'll see. But she is safe and out of the camps, which is wonderful. If you missed that event or any of our 21 previous Zoom events, you can find them on our website, and you can watch the recordings, and we post all the chat. So you should be aware that what you post in chat does become part of the record, but we like you to be active in the chat, so please do. And likewise, if you go to our ICSVE YouTube channel, you can see all of our 265 counter-narrative videos featuring ISIS, al-Shabaab insiders, and our growing library. I think it's maybe 22 of former white supremacists and far-right members denouncing violent extremism. And we're posting the links to all of these in the chat if you'd like to go look those up later. Today, we're proud to have Todd Helmus from RAND joining us, who has done some great work. I've known Todd for years and years. He's been working in this field of countering violent extremism forever. And he's done some great work in this area with his team. And then we have our own research team who I'll be introducing as well. Before we begin, I just want to say a few things about ground rules. We like to have lively discussion and chat. Some people block the chat. We do just the opposite. We like people to pose their questions, have side discussions, to have a community of sorts. But to have a community, especially a global community, we're all different religions, we're all different races and ethnicities, and we need to be respectful of that to be able to pull together a community. So we've learned by hard experience to warn everybody that if you insult someone else's race, ethnicity, religion, we will eject you from the Zoom conference immediately, no questions asked, and you won't be welcome back to future events. So please stay professional and polite in your comments, because these are sensitive issues. I told you, we will grab all the chat. Also, we'll send you the link to everything after the event, and you have been added to our mailing list. I hope that's okay. If it's not, you can always opt out yourself. And I always like to thank all of our past and present sponsors for the work that we're able to do. The US State Department, who's sponsoring some work we're doing in Trinidad and Tobago, USAID, which we just had a subcontract with in the Maldives, the European Union, UN Women, Facebook, some private donors, and the state of Qatar. And we're really grateful to all of our sponsors, but I always give a special shout out to the state of Qatar for supporting our Breaking the ISIS Brand counter-narrative project, in which we've now been able to make 271 in-depth video interviews of ISIS defectors, prisoners, and returnees, as well as 16 of al-Shabaab, and out of which we've created 250 short counter-narrative videos, which we are active on Facebook.
This lady kind of does what Stern used to do.
Somebody needs to mute. And now we have also moved into white supremacism, and we've just completed 50 research interviews and are doing a similar work, creating short counter-narrative videos. TM Garret is making all of those, and Zach Badorf formerly made some of them. So our short video clips are made by TM, Sheikh Ali, and myself working in concert at this point. And we subtitled them all slowly, but surely in the 27 languages in which ISIS and Al-Shabaab recruit, and now in the various languages in which white supremacists are also active. If you'd like to be one of our translators, it's a volunteer position, but let us know. We were particularly looking for somebody that volunteered to help in Greek, and then we lost track of that person. They're really short scripts. They're like 50 lines tops. And we're also really grateful to Facebook, which has partnered with us and made it possible for us to do campaigns all over the world. Molly runs all of those campaigns, and she's amazing at it. She's just been busy the last 2 weeks writing up our results from 18 months of campaigning, I think in, is it 12 or 13 different languages on Facebook throughout Europe. 10? Okay, 10. And so today's panel is addressing extremism when it attempts to or actually does infiltrate the military. And this is an important issue for militaries, not just in the US, but around the world, and also for our police and security services, as many police members are made up of former military members. So a radicalized military member may also become a radicalized police officer. Likewise, in most militaries, all members go through basic training, meaning that they have weapons trained to some extent. And while in the military, they also have access to weapons and oftentimes sensitive intelligence that an ordinary citizen likely would not have. Likewise, when we see former high-level military members, like for example, retired Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, put up a video of he and his family swearing allegiance to QAnon, we have to ask what level of influence do actions like these have for the entire military and for the veteran community. So to adequately address these challenges of violent extremism in the military, several questions need to be answered. Why do violent extremists seek out current and former military members for radicalization and recruitment? Why are current and former military members susceptible to violent extremism? And what are the risks and benefits to various options with dealing with violent extremism in the military, ranging from immediate dishonorable discharge to psychosocial treatment? So today, Todd Helmus is a senior behavioral scientist at the RAND Corporation, and he will be speaking more to the last question, although he can address all three, and he's a member of the Pardee RAND Graduate School faculty. He specializes in strategic communications, terrorism, and disinformation. Helmus's research has focused on radicalization to violent extremism, as I said, for years and years, and he studied pathways into and out of extremism in the United States. He's examined ways the US military can better counter violent extremism in its midst, and he's assessed the impact of overseas counter-violent extremist campaigns. He's also studied Russian disinformation campaigns in the United States and Europe, which makes me want to say Dobre Utra, Tovarish. Helmus has served as a deployed advisor to US commanders in Iraq 2008 and Afghanistan 2010-2011. And he's led studies on US efforts to train Afghan Special Operations Forces. He has his PhD in clinical psychology from Wayne State University. I'm going to introduce everyone at once and then we'll speak. TM Garret is an extremism researcher and analyst at ICSVE. We're very proud that TM has joined our team in the last 6 months. He's a German-American public speaker, human rights activist, consultant, author, extremism researcher, interfaith activist, and also founder of Change, a nonprofit organization which engages in anti-racism and anti-violence campaigns, food drives, interfaith work, as well as an exit program which helps individuals leave extremist groups, and Erasing Hate, international tattoo campaign and movement that covers up racist and hate tattoos for free, something that's really important for people trying to leave these movements when they've marked indelibly on their body who they purportedly belong to. Before he started engaging in civil rights work, TM was a white supremacist in leading roles in Europe and the US. He left this lifestyle behind and the ideology for good in 2003 and has been doing good ever since. Garret works closely with the Jewish community as well as the Black community. And he's a campus speaker against anti-Semitism for the Simon Wiesenthal Center and a member of the NAACP, sorry. And he's also a US ambassador for Exit Germany, an excellent program in Germany, and an honorary board member of We Are Many United Against Hate. So welcome to TM and to Todd. Then lastly, Molly Ellenberg is a research fellow at the International Center for the Study of Violent Extremism. Molly is a doctoral student studying in social psychology at the University of Maryland. And she's studying under ICSVE's esteemed advisor, Dr. Arieh Kruglonsky. And at ICSVE, Molly is doing many things. I'm not going to list them all. She's working on coding and analyzing all of the data. So she's coded all of the ISIS interviews, all 273 of them, and all 50 of the white supremacist interviews. And then she does our data analysis and does a lot of writing on our reports, and she's quite amazing. And she runs all of our Facebook campaigns to disrupt ISIS's and Al-Shabaab's online and face-to-face recruitment, and now including our new foray into doing the same with white supremacism. And she helps to develop and give trainings for use with the Breaking the ISIS brand counter-narrative project videos. I'm not going to introduce myself because that is enough on introductions. And let's start. So Molly, if you want to put up the slides, and we'll start, and then we'll move to Todd after that. So let's go ahead from this slide, and then you take it over, Molly.
All right. Yeah, so we're going to be discussing, as Anne just said, about violent extremism in the military. And this really came into the spotlight in 2021. And a big shout out to GW's Program on Extremism, which published a report on military involvement in the January 6th riot on Capitol Hill. Which found that 12% of people charged at the time that the report was published were veterans or active duty military, most of whom were veterans. 25% were commissioned officers, 44% had been deployed at least once. But the most kind of shocking and alarming finding was that 37% of people with military experience who were arrested as part of the riot were associated with violent extremist groups. And so that seems, kind of low, but contrary to some popular beliefs, the majority of people at the January 6th riot were not part of organized violent extremist groups. So 37% of people with military experience actually made them 4 times more likely to be part of a group like the Proud Boys or the Oath Keepers than rioters without military experience. And so as a result of these findings and others, Secretary of Defense Austin ordered a series of stand-down days to address violent extremism in the military. But nevertheless, the problem continues. Most recently, there may be something even more recent, but quite recently, Texas National Guard member Franklin Barrett Sechrist was arrested for setting a fire at an Austin synagogue, causing $25,000 in damage. When police searched his car, they found swastikas and stickers with other anti-Semitic sentiments. And so despite this renewed focus on violent extremism in the military, it's not a new phenomenon. We can go back 30 years and see that are almost 30 years, 25 years, and see that Timothy McVeigh, who carried out the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995, had been a soldier and was a recipient of the Bronze Star. Active members of the military at Fort Bragg participated in a murder of a Black couple in 1995 as well. They were members of a white supremacist group. But it's not limited to white supremacism, although this seems to be more common. But Army Dr. Nidal Hassan carried out the Fort Hood shooting in 2009, killing, I believe, 30 people, and he was inspired by the sermons of Anwar al-Awlaki, like many foreign fighters in ISIS have been as well. But of course, the problem isn't limited to the United States as well. Canada has had a series of high-profile scandals regarding members of their armed forces joining white supremacist groups, as has Germany and a few other countries as well. And so, as I mentioned, Secretary Austin ordered this series of stand-down days. But what was found during these days, and also in reports spanning back 20 years, is that the guidelines and protocols for dealing with violent extremism in the military, and the US military specifically, are really murky. They don't really give a good definition of what violent extremism is. In fact, definitions of extremism have at times included evangelical Christianity and Orthodox Judaism in addition to white supremacism. So these were not defined as violent extremism, but they were nevertheless defined all within one category as extremism. And additionally, active participation in violent extremist groups is prohibited, but passive participation, including attending meetings and receiving mail from these groups, is not prohibited among active duty military members. So they can still be participants in these groups while serving. Additionally, there are broader issues, such as the war on terror being implicated as a source of dehumanization of Arabs and Muslims within military members, as well as within the broader society, that is then easily extended to other minority groups. We had one of our interviewees say that he had basically already learned to dehumanize the people that he was fighting in Iraq. And so then it was easy to extend that to all Muslims. And then it was easy to extend that to all people who were different. And again, military members report being uncertain as to the protocols for reporting violent extremism. They don't know what will happen to the person they report, and they also don't know what will happen to them if they report. And that's another challenge, is if they fear that there will be repercussions for them for reporting violent extremism. And so what we're going to be discussing today, as far as the features of violent extremism in the military, is based on, in addition to an extensive literature review, in-depth psychological interviews with 50 current and former members of far-right white supremacist and hate groups. These interviews are coded from their verbatim notes on 252 variables. These are very similar to the variables that we code all of the ISIS interviews on. These are about the vulnerabilities, their life experiences prior to joining their groups, their influences, including whether they were influenced by people in the military, their motivations for joining, their roles and experiences in the group, and their sources of disillusionment in the group. And of course, we also focus on the reasons that people gave if they were in the military for joining, and if they weren't in the military, whether they specifically tried to recruit military members, whether they interacted with people who had military experience while they were in their groups. So within this sample of 50, 32 people provided some sort of information about military members and law enforcement in their groups in the United States, Canada, and Germany as well. And 3 individuals actually served in the US military, 1 in the Army National Guard, 1 in the Army, and 1 in the Navy. And so these are links that I realize you can't click on because they're in a PowerPoint, but you can see both of our articles, both a longer report on the ICSVE website, as well as a short report in Military Times regarding these interviews.
I think this is over to TM now. So
Okay, thank you, Molly, for that. I made my own experiences in that movement over 20 years ago, but also in my research, working in in intervention programs, my exit program, but also the work with ICSVE, doing the interviews and the videos, etc. And there's different aspects when it comes to the radicalization. For one, it's the army is, or military in general, also law enforcement, a great breeding ground for recruits for the white supremacist movement, white nationalist movement. Molly already explained that, because people are just looking for a new home when they get out. They need that rank structure and these titles, and so white supremacist groups offer all that. And often they get radicalized. I know about another member that is not in the study, who also went overseas, I believe to Iraq and then Afghanistan later. And he was trained to hate Muslims, to target, dehumanize Muslims. So it's easier to, if you have to shoot at them. And he brought it back home and was sort of semi-radicalized to that one group. And he was looking for a group as well. And so he was, of course, recruited by the Ku Klux Klan in that case. And like in that one case we had in the research tool that Molly mentioned, the same thing. It just was taken over and adapted for all these other races and ethnic groups. And then everybody was hated. Another aspect that is really, really important is also infiltration in the military. And I know that from my own experience, because in that movement back then and still now, people are very well aware that once the day comes, because all these people are waiting every day for the day X, that they take over the government, that they take over with their own government, etc. But those people are well aware that they don't have a chance if they don't have the military or law enforcement on their side. And that they they need that support. And a good example is actually January 6th, what happened at the Capitol here in Washington, D.C. We only can imagine if we would have had radicalized military, higher militaries and generals that would have supported what was going on in the Capitol, then we probably would have had a military coup. Fortunately, we didn't have that, but it can happen. And this is also why it's important to watch radicalization within the military, because a lot of these people in the military, when they get slowly radicalized, they're often not card-carrying members of classic hate groups. They sometimes join Facebook groups online, are anonymous, and put that out there and get more and more radicalized, but also through the media. And then you have a real problem on your hands. And if they are members of Facebook groups, hate groups use that as well. And once these groups have the backing from the military and they know that, then it's easier for them really to start something. Like if you look at incidents like Charlottesville, when Heather Hayes got killed, when the white supremacist drove with his car in the crowd. And he also said he wanted to start this race war. And most people in the movement know nothing big will happen when something like that happens, because they know they don't have the support in the society and they don't have the support in the military. So this is very, very important. And those groups are successful recruiting people that are active in the military, not only the veterans that are looking for a new home. They are great for them to train them with weapons and everything and operational skills, and give them that sense of discipline structure, as you can see on the slide. But they're also actively looking to recruit, either send people in the military or recruit people that are in the military or law enforcement. We did that in Germany with a group I was actually leading. We had 2 active police members, police officers in our ranks. And it was also planned to recruit more whole units, etc., because we knew we can't do anything without its support. And there's also cases here in the US with law enforcement in the police. One member of a, back then in the 1980s, of a group in Philadelphia, he's now working for the Department of Justice. And no one really knows if the guy ever was de-radicalized or what is going on. He's in a higher position there. Or another high-ranking former white supremacist who built up a worldwide music hate network group, became a sheriff in northern Texas. And only coincidentally somebody found out and it blew up on the media. Otherwise, he would be out there as a sheriff. And this is when white supremacist groups, white nationalist groups really get influence. And this is what we have to look at. And this is also happening in the military. So this is very important.
I'm going to make sure that I'm sharing my sound before we show this video real quick. All right, now it should work.
I went to boot camp in '99 and graduated. I signed up to be a Navy nuke, and then I went to the USS Chicago. It was after I got out. The economy was really bad. I was looking for a job and getting pretty depressed. They had that Gangland show on there, and one of the episodes was skinheads and the other was a Klan. We watched the one on the Klan, and my wife was like, hey, they seem like they're right up your alley. And next thing I know, I'm going to a rally. A lot of people in the military have a real hard stance on certain issues, and I was already in when 9/11 happened. So, of course, I had some real bad feelings about Muslims and stuff like that. And I think once you hate one group of people, they kind of carry over to all the other different ethnicities and subsets in the society. And then when you're in the military for so long, when you get out, you lose that sense of camaraderie and the whole rank structure and everything. So it kind of like filled the void. They made me a Kleagle, which is a recruiter. And then like a month later, I was an exalted Cyclops. A few months after that, it seemed like I was a Grand Dragon. They keep giving you all these titles, and then you feel like you're accomplishing something in life. When you watch the movies like Mississippi Burning, it's like, wow, I'm actually in the middle of all this. And then I found out they hated Jewish people. I thought the Klan was supposed to hate black people. Jews run the banks, the media, they control everything in society. I did start to believe that. They say they stink, they're uneducated, they can't do anything unless the white man teaches them how to do it. Let's have a racial war like that. That's what everybody looked forward to. If we did win, it probably would have been modeled after Nazi Germany with concentration camps. The old Klan group I was with, they rallied with the NSM quite a few times. I knew all their higher-ups. Same thing as the Klan, only more organized. The NSM guys, they called me up and they asked if I would be interested to partake in a documentary with Dia Khan. She came out and she filmed with me and my ex-fiance for 2.5 days or so. And when she left, like, I considered her a friend. And I was like, why do I hate this woman just because she's a Muslim and has darker skin? And then I finally agreed to go to church. I basically rededicated my life to God. Like, I used to like go to other churches and like seek out pastors and like want to debate the Bible with them. Well, when I asked Pastor Will these questions, he's like, Ken, I don't know what to tell you. All I know is that Jesus is love. And I'm like, okay, that answer makes more sense than anything anyone else has ever told me. So I was like, yeah, you know what? I'm done with this crap. Since I got out, I have a better quality of friends and more of them. When I look back on it, I'm like, wow, I can't believe I ever joined the Klan, knowing what I knew before I joined and staying in for as long as I did. Most of them just seemed like they lived in crappy trails in the woods, and they had like no teeth in their mouth, and they seemed pretty stupid. I was with the Klan for 3 years, and then I was with the National Socialist Movement for 3 years. I'm embarrassed that I used to be in that same mindset. Me knowing in my head and my heart that Jews are God's chosen people. Nothing good ever happens from the white supremacist groups out there, or any kind of supremacist group. If you're thinking about joining or you want to get out, like, there's nothing that you have to be scared of, you know, by getting out of that. I did it, anybody can do it.
So thank you, Molly, for showing that little video. This individual, Ken Parker, he was interviewed actually by, he mentioned Dia Khan. which is a documentary, White Right, Beating the Enemy. You can look it up. It's a really great documentary, and somebody just said it. And like Todd Helmus said it in the chat room as well, Dia Khan has changed several people that participated in the documentary that have left the movement, the white supremacist movement, afterwards, with her compassion that she shows people in respect, and people just unlearned to hate her as a Muslim because it just didn't work. And people got even further. Just before I hand it back over to Molly and Dr. Speckhard, that individual, he said in the documentary, he got a Muslim friend now, but he would never break bread with a Jew. Well, that was in 2018. I worked with that individual in my own intervention program, and in the meantime, I have taken him to a synagogue in Chicago, and we went to a Shabbat dinner with an Orthodox Jewish family in Memphis. So he's over there too, and he was breaking bread with a Jew. So it's a slow de-radicalization. But again, as he said, he was first radicalized in the military. And he came back with that, and those hate groups filled the void. They welcomed him, and this happens just very, very often.
Thank you, TM. So how do I take over? Well, I don't mind if everyone sees you. Oh, let's see. Do I have to unmute? No.
You're good. You can just go ahead.
Okay, so then our next question is why are, oh, and I want to say two things. One, that last video was made by TM Garret, and I think it's a really cool mini documentary, and he's quite talented. We're so happy for that. And I want to make sure that I thank Jeff Shoup and Beyond Barriers, because TM Garret helped us to get a lot of our interviews. Some of them we just got by hook and crook, but also Jeff Shoup at Beyond Barriers and his group helped us to contact people. And they also helped Todd Helmus to contact people for their research. So I want to make sure to thank them. So our next question, why are, and thanks to Ken Parker for his bravery to speak about his experience. Why are military members susceptible to violent extremist recruitment? And what we found in the sample that we have, and right now it's just 34 people that spoke about either that they themselves had been radicalized as in the military, or they were close associates of people that were in the military. And what their view, or leaders in the group, their view was that it was a need for belonging, a need for community and camaraderie, things that are all present in the military in a really positive way, can also be present in violent extremist groups. Also aggrievement toward the government for actual or perceived lack of support, particularly after getting out of the military. You'll see that in the next video. The idea of being attracted to a noble cause. People that are in the military swear an oath to protect our Constitution, at least in the US military, and that is a noble cause, but then being attracted again to something else that is sold to them in propaganda as a noble cause. Also, we see it as a coping strategy for PTSD. Suddenly there's a group that's offering discipline and structure that was present before, attachments and bonding. There's the continued combat mentality. So having flashbacks and high arousal might seem more normalized if you're in a group like that. And we do find that people that have PTSD sometimes keep putting themselves back in dangerous situations because that's the only place they feel normal, where their symptoms fit the situation if they haven't been treated. It's also a drinking culture. And we know that people with PTSD, particularly vets, sometimes turn to alcohol to damp down their post-traumatic flashbacks. So the next video is of Ryan Lovie, who was kind enough to give us an interview. And this video is made by Zach Badorf.
My mom lived in the heart of Flint, so we lived in a really, really bad neighborhood. Gangs, drive-by shootings. So I'd started hanging out with gangs. I'd started doing some drugs. But my mom's not home, and our stepfather didn't care about us, so I just would leave and go run the streets at night. So as soon as I was 18 years old, I enlisted. I deployed to Iraq for 18 months. Probably one of the worst deployments for a lot of different units. There's a lot of deaths. There's so many IED explosions going off all the time. It was definitely a tough time. I decided to come home, and when I did, it was hard to find a job anywhere. There was all kinds of different hate flags that were Confederate, Nazi flags. white nationalist flags. He had flags all up and down his driveway. And he had a swastika burnt into his grass, literally. Ron Chadwell, he was more of like Aryan Brotherhood in a lot of his beliefs. He talked really low, almost mysterious in a way. He was very, very charismatic at the way that he portrayed things. He played on my anger at the time. I was angry at the world. I was angry at what had happened to me as a child and my dad. The fact that my father wasn't in my life. I was angry at the fact that I felt like the army kind of had abandoned me and didn't do anything for us. Black people aren't our friends. Look how white Europeans have flourished compared to black communities. I started to believe it. He was under investigation. There was a guy that had joined their group, and they found out later on that he was a Jewish infiltrator. I don't know if he was working for the police, but when they found out who he was, they stabbed him to death and then drowned him. To me at the time, it was like, I felt like people were looking up to me. I had this like little group. It really starts to feed into your ego. I think he was misunderstood, and that, yeah, he made some mistakes. That I didn't think he was a bad person. As much as I was sitting here and spitting this stuff out to people, deep down, like, I always had that gut feeling that what I was talking about was just wrong. It just didn't feel right. On the side, we were stealing boat motors. There was already gang task force that were already looking into us and keeping an eye on us. So when they came in, they raided us hard. They came in with AR-15s and pistols. They had my whole street blocked off. It was probably one of the craziest things I'd ever seen in my life. They found 2 of the 4-wheelers that we had stolen. They had me shook. And so I admitted to doing everything. And my uncle was pissed. I was scared. My first time ever being in jail. I didn't know what to do. I had this huge swastika tattoo on my arm. Next thing I know, I get jumped. And I'm getting hit from everywhere, and I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know how to protect myself except for just to cover myself up. But the guys that were part of these hate groups didn't come over to save me. But the one person that did come over to help me out was my cellmate at the time, a black guy. So from there, we kind of started to build a relationship. He just kind of took me under his wing there for a while. You just need to learn. You need to sit down with some people and learn about some other cultures. I started to kind of reopen my eyes up to the fact that it didn't matter what color of skin you have. It don't matter where you come from. We all make mistakes. We all do stupid stuff, but we're human. Probably one of the hardest moments for me in my life, because one of them actually had me show them my tattoo at the time. I hadn't had it covered up yet. I bawled my eyes out. And it was a deep moment for me in my life. Understand that a lot of these guys have learned psychologically how to talk to you the right ways and try to make you feel comfortable as a friend, but they're not your friends. If somebody tells you something, go out and research it. Go ask somebody else to talk to you about it. What they're teaching you is just propaganda, and it's just to feed their own egos. At the end of the day, that's really all it was, I think, to Ron, was just his ego. And now he got murdered. Having that peace in your heart and love first is going to make you feel so much better at the end of the day than to hold on to hate and anger, because it will eat you up. It tears you up inside, internally, physically.
So I think you can see that we start these videos with telling their story, and we name them obnoxious names so that they attract the actual audience that they should on Facebook and on YouTube. And we hope that through these actual stories of people that have been in it, that it will start to move people out. But it's also a great illustration for something like this. We also have the opposite challenge, violent extremists joining the military. So already radicalized, but joining. And why is that? And what we find is it's in the violent extremist groups' best interest for their members to join the military. And we heard this from many interviews, that they encourage them, and TM was telling us the same from his, that that they would join to receive training, that they should join to obtain access to weapons. And we have had with Aryan nations getting caught bringing weapons from, or trying to bring weapons from the military, the US military. They also try to get a hold of intelligence and hard targets for attacks. And this is both on the side of groups like ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and white supremacists. And joining the military is a way to recruit new members to spread it throughout the military. We also find that some violent extremists may openly espouse their ideologies in order to radicalize and recruit others, where others hide their beliefs and don't let anybody know while they're in the military, because if they are detected as part of the extremist group, they may be kicked out. So we've been offered some interviews that we couldn't make videos of people that are active duty, and waiting to see how that works out. So this last video that I'll show you is of Sean Gillespie, and he's an example of somebody that was radicalized before he went in. And then we're almost ready to turn it over to Todd, but we'll play this one and just have 2 more slides after that.
My mom got me initially, and she actually gave custody of me to my father for about $300 and some odd so she could go down to Reno and continue to live her party lifestyle. From, I want to say, age 7 to 10, I was repeatedly molested and raped. I was just holding all this abuse in and not knowing how to do it. So I'd get into fights. I'd threaten to kill myself. So I'd live on the streets. I'd hang around with a bunch of punk rocker kids. And I was like, oh, I'm a Satanist. I listen to Marilyn Manson. I'm a punk rocker. I got a mohawk. I ended up going to the juvenile detention facility for 2 years. I read an article about Aryan Nations. Well, I'm white. I like the military. These people are militia. Okay, cool. I was released and immediately ran away. Sean just took me. He's like, let's shave your head. That's when my indoctrination started. Skinheads recruit just by kind of providing a family, just like any gang, really. I ended up spending 3 months there living on the compound. They just basically started teaching me anti-Semitism with the Bible. I just needed some type of outlet for my hate. I felt like I was part of a cause. It gave me something to belong to. Here I am, a soldier for my race. I don't have anything else. They're telling me at all times, you are superior to everybody else because you're an Aryan man. I honestly think hate's a drug. I can walk into a room with a swastika shirt and people are afraid of me. Turned 17, I joined the Army National Guard. I always loved the Army. I ended up getting kicked out for being racist because I ended up protesting the Martin Luther King parade, wearing a swastika, and getting arrested and facing 2 years. We're just going to give you a month of probation so you can go to basic training. My company commander, he was not too happy about that. I got a stern lecture with a bunch of 4-letter words. Honestly, I should have got a dishonorable discharge and been kicked out immediately, but they didn't. They let me stay in. I ended up getting kicked out for being a skinhead because I was very vocal and was very active with Aryan Nations, was passing out literature, recruiting people, and ended up joining the Army again. Come back in a year, ended up getting kicked out for the same thing. They were like, you need to renounce this. And I was like, screw you, white power. I'd done small little hate crimes and stuff, vandalism, super nonviolent. Tried to curb stomp a guy downtown here before you stomp on the back of their head. It didn't work because we were scared kids. I just felt my life was over. I lost the career I love. I was having trouble with employment. I was working at Taco Bell. So I just was like, well, I'm going to go around the country doing hate crimes. And that's what I did. I beat up some black guy with a baseball bat. I ended up throwing this Molotov cocktail at the Jewish temple B'nai Israel, which is the synagogue that I ended up getting 39 years for damaging. I caused $250 in damage to the building. I went to USP Florence, which is in Colorado. It's a high max prison. I was violent. They were like, you got 40 years, dude, stab people. At the time, there's no consequences. I ended up spending 8.5 years there in solitary confinement. And it gave me a lot of time to do introspection because by this time I started to question racism. I just was looking at these people. I was like, these people are ridiculous. I decided to leave. I started cutting myself. I cut my entire arm open. And I took a overdose of lithium and almost died. I just had no hope. I was like, well, I'm serving 40 years for something I don't even believe in anymore. These people will use you It's not about a cause or a movement. It's about using kids who have no other option, have no self-esteem. It's not worth it. The minute I got arrested, all your supposed friends will leave. They don't care about you. I spent 16 years for the movement in prison, and I regret every minute of it because it just ruined my life. Getting help and being honest with myself about being abused and being raped as a kid, it helped me exponentially. You can either continue to be a victim and blame other people, or you can get help.
So I think it's over to you, Molly.
Yes, so now that we've discussed this challenge, what should be done to counter violent extremist radicalization and recruitment in the military? As we talked about before, there's a lack of clarity and specificity regarding military policies. And so one of the proposed solutions, which Sean actually talks about in his video, he says he should have been dishonorably discharged. And this is kind of a common view. And as you know, a positive, it does immediately remove a radicalized person from the ranks. And it sends a message of zero tolerance that, you know, this isn't something that you can get away with at all. You're out immediately. But there are also a lot of disadvantages. For one, it creates a sense of grievance against the US government and against the military that could then be exploited by violent extremist groups to encourage this person to become even more violent. It also nullifies the person's identity and belonging and camaraderie that they had as part of the military. And so this could lead them to seek out that sense of belonging elsewhere, particularly in a white supremacist or other violent extremist group. And it also puts the wider community at risk. You know, by immediately removing a radicalized person from within the military, you're also immediately putting them into a society where they have weapons training, where they are angry, where they have a lack of identity and sense of belonging. So you're really putting the wider community at grave risk by doing this.
So we've also been thinking this over, and Todd's going to go a lot more in detail about this, of what if you offer treatment? The pros are the psychological and social factors that result in radicalization can be addressed in a similar manner as PTSD and substance abuse disorder. And I think you saw in these videos a lot of features that were present even before joining the military, like Ryan having been abused as a kid, Sean also being abused, and between having a mom that abandoned him. All of these things could be addressed if they were put into treatment, and then perhaps they would easily renounce the radicalization because it wouldn't be serving as much of a purpose anymore. And I'm definitely a believer in de-radicalization. I keep hearing all the time, it seems to be the popular thing to say, that de-radicalization is debunked. I don't think so. Cognitive behavioral therapy has been around for a long time, and it's a well-established evidence-based approach, and it does work for radicalized people as well. TM can tell you that he's worked with people, and it's tough, and he's not working as a psychologist, he's just supporting them as a fellow traveler in this world. And people do walk away. And these are examples of 3 people that have walked away. But you can especially walk away when you have not yet committed any violent actions. The cons to treatment is it may reinforce to victims and perpetrators of violent extremism that such ideologies and actions are at least somewhat tolerated by the military. And we did see in Sean's example that he was not treated. I think if he had been treated, if they had gotten to his childhood issues right away, he wouldn't have gone down the path that he continued to go down, because when he finally did get treatment in prison, totally turned him around. And you saw how suicidal he finally got. But you see in his case being treated lightly and going back to it over and over again and becoming a really violent actor. And another con is treatment could be interpreted as the military being sympathetic to violent extremists, which isn't a good message. I tend to think that treatment is a great idea, but that's coming from a psychologist. And what we've come to is recommending a middle ground, that once identified in the military, violent extremists who have not yet committed a violent crime would be required to undergo an intensive treatment program, and that those who refuse treatment or are non-cooperative would be dishonorably discharged. So get those out that won't take part in treatment, but if they will take part in treatment and you've got good treaters, at least try, because just releasing them back into society, these are weapons trained people, and they will have a grievance if they're kicked out of the military. And we've heard that many times in our interviews, that then they gravitated to the white supremacist groups. So from here, we are going to turn it over to Todd. So let's see, Todd, you have to screen share, and we'll see your slides.
All right. Screen share slides. All right, well, thanks. That was, I think this is a difficult talk to follow. That was, I don't know, really captivating videos. And I appreciate the discussion that you had about the pros and cons of treatment in the military. So I think that's certainly a complex issue, and it's interesting. It's good to see you address it from different perspectives. So what I'll talk about now is a study that we did, we recently published, and it basically what we wanted to do is identify some considerations for how you might go about addressing extremism in the ranks. So now I won't belabor this because Molly did such a good job sort of talking about the overview of all of this, but obviously the extremism problem in the military goes from the very founding of the Ku Klux Klan by Confederate generals. And there's obviously been a long history of racism and segregation in the force. And then obviously more pertinent than that, a lot of events that Molly talked about were, you know, outright extremists, either in the military conducting attacks, or, you know, even hosting their own parades at some points. So a lot of examples of extremism, and a lot of efforts by the Department of Defense to address this. In 1986, the SecDef published a directive against white supremacy. In 1996, after 2 African Americans were killed at Fort Bragg by members of by extremist members of the 82nd Airborne, the DoD banned right-wing extremism and neo-Nazis. So anyway, long history, and the DoD has tried to confront this for some time. So despite long-standing nature of the problem, there's been little in the way of serious research. So big kudos to Ann and the team for doing the work that they did. It's really a critical problem, but one that's received very little in the way of research. We know a few things, as I think Molly and Ann talked about. Extremist groups actively target these folks. There's been other research from University of Maryland suggesting that 30% of known cases of right-wing extremists have military backgrounds. And interestingly, a recent survey in the Department of Defense and the military that suggested that 50% of servicemen and women of color had experienced either racism or some sort of racist ideology. So it's, you know, this is commonly experienced. But despite this, and despite all the things that we know, there's still a lot we don't know. We don't know, you know, we still have a lot to learn about what makes military service members at risk for this. We don't know prevalence rates. We know that within extremist groups, military members, the presence of military personnel are high, but we don't know what the prevalence of racist ideology or extremist participation are within the Department of Defense. And so those are just a few of the key issues. And what does it look like at the unit level? You know, there's a lot that goes on. It's interesting, the last video talked about individuals' commander being aware that they participated in white nationalism work, yet, you know, basically got a browbeating, but that's it. So is that what happens at these unit levels? Oftentimes we don't know. So what we wanted to do was review sort of counter-extremism policies as they're practiced in the United States, and think through like what some options might be for implementing a Department of Defense strategy. And it obviously goes without saying the Department of Defense is working this issue. They have a report already written up by Bishop Garrison, who's been tasked by the Secretary to address identify policies the DoD can implement. And that's working its way through the wickets right now. It's delayed by several months, as a recent Politico report noted, but hopefully that will be out soon. So, what you're looking at here is basically a mobilization status that my colleague Brian Jackson did in his assessment of domestic counterviolent extremism in the United States. You basically have several phases of counterviolent extremism programming. You can do early phase initiatives that try to protect people who are vulnerable, or try to target people who are in the process of radicalization, all the way to middle phase interventions that where individuals are radicalized but not necessarily violent, and then that process where they mobilize toward violence, then there are interventions that address that. So we reviewed the common DoD interventions. I think someone's off, has a hot mic. So check your mute status. So we reviewed the process and considered what steps might be appropriate. We had two assumptions, I think. Because we don't know the prevalence rates, we can assume there's a problem, but I guess for this sake, we assume that the problem is not huge, so to speak, right? And that's, what does that even mean? I'm not sure, but we sort of assume it's an issue, but not one that is a dire threat to military status, at least as of yet. And the other thing to recognize too is the need to tread carefully. I think anytime you can go into CVE programming, and U.S. experienced this with the Islamic extremism in these last 20 years, is it becomes very politicized very quickly, and individuals many individuals can feel that they're targeted by these interventions unfairly, and the Muslim populations felt that in the last 20 years, and we're seeing right now conservative groups are feeling targeted by these interventions, and so the political nature of this has to be a concern. So I'll go through these relatively quickly. So, looking at the early phase, there are three different types of interventions, major interventions. One are messaging campaigns, from full-on counter-narrative efforts that target a lot of different people in the hopes of maybe offering resilience to those who are non-extreme, to the great videos that Anne and that ICSVE puts out that are very targeted toward extremist individuals. There's community awareness briefings that U.S. Department of Homeland Security did a number of these along with the National Counterterrorism Center. And these community briefings were really designed to just educate the public, those at risk. And for the last 20 years, it's been Islamic populations, Muslim groups. But in this case, to educate them, identify for them what the risk factors are, what to look for, what the policies of the U.S. government are, and to address concerns and to build relationships. And then, of course, you have resilience risk factors that try to, say, for example, protect people by addressing mental health concerns. So in looking at how we apply some of these, I'll go through a few of these. One are warnings. Warning interventions basically warn individuals that they might encounter false, misleading, persuasive content, or in this case, a potential recruitment or radicalization efforts. And then, of course, there's inoculation interventions that warn people about propaganda and provide directions, actually, and an example and experience in refuting that. The DoD has started to implement this on some level. New people who are coming in are being warned about the prospect for becoming targeted for extremists. I think people on their way out of the Department of Defense are being warned as well that they are at risk of these types of activities as veterans. And the data actually suggests that these warnings are effective, but they're even more effective if you add this inoculation component. So that's one thing we argue is not only just warn people that they're going to be targeted, but also provide them some way of practicing ways of dissuading or rejecting that target. Media literacy programming, I think, is an interesting one. We know that media literacy programs seek to help audiences be curious about sources of information, assess their credibility, and think critically about material that's presented. And we hear a lot about media literacy with disinformation on the rise. And in fact, the last National Defense Authorization Act stipulated that the DoD has to implement a media literacy training program for the force. One challenge, though, is how do you convert media literacy training into something that's going to be effective for extremism? The research, we do not even know right now if that is going to be effective. There's some studies that suggest that media literacy programming to address racism, it can be counterproductive, can make people more racist, or at least more concerned about being about racism. But ultimately we argue that there's probably value as the DoD implements this media literacy programming to think about subtle ways that they can address extremist type content in the training. Social media search. I think it was noted before that ICSVE program is putting out ads on Facebook and other social media platforms, putting out this amazing video content. Google, I don't know as much about that program as I do about Moonshot's redirect program. We did some work with them before on this. And for those who are not familiar, Moonshot basically does ads on Google searching that put content in front of people searching for, say, how do I join the KKK? And in theory, they click the link and then they're exposed to a video content that attempts to redirect them away from extremism. Our observation of this is that we don't know if that works. The evidence for those types of videos being persuasive is limited. And there could be some risk, depending on how the videos are done, that it could be counterproductive. What we argue is this type of targeted search that I see that the AND does, and as well as Moonshot, could be like a really unique opportunity for the Department of Defense, because you can target these ads directly to installations or the counties which have military installations. And so in this way, it can be a very highly targeted way of communicating with those at risk of radicalization. Even better are some innovations that are happening in this, where it's not just putting counter narrative content, but then also offering treatment or crisis counseling lines and things like that that can direct treatment at these individuals as they're radicalizing. Hang on, I'm trying to, okay. Education and awareness campaigns. I think this is probably the biggest thing the Department of Defense has to do, is educate audiences in the military about this extremism threat. And there's several ways that they need to do this. One, they need to educate audiences about the policies. If there are going to be policies that prohibit this type of content, then people need to know that. Expectations for officers and NCOs as to how they manage leadership issues in regard to this need to be communicated. And then also help audiences identify warning signs, prevention steps, and maybe even some basic intervention steps to help people who are in the process of this and who are detected, at the early stage or within their units. My guess is that anything the Department of Defense does, they'll definitely be working to educate their force on the policies and on the risks that they face. Then community resilience exercises. These are basically tabletop exercises that DHS has done for some time that help communities who are at risk of radicalization, figure out what they're going to do about it. Basically, they bring different parties together, work through a particular issue or problem, and then use the lessons learned from that to improve their policies and their response to either incoming radicalization threats or more direct violent threats. And the Department of Defense probably needs to do this as well, particularly installation. So one could imagine after, like say what happened in 1996, when it was discovered a neo-Nazi group had infiltrated the 82nd Airborne. That's certainly a case where they need to put all hands on deck and help that installation and that unit think through steps that they're going to undertake to address this, to address whatever problem they have. All right, last couple ones here. These are middle phase interventions to influence those already radicalized. And so I'll talk through a couple of these. One is addressing perceptions in the force. One thing that has become clear as the U.S. has tried to address extremism, Islamic extremism, is that the perceptions really matter among audiences as whether or not they're willing to pick up a phone and inform authorities that someone is on the cusp of radicalizing or engaging in violent activities. It's well known that that the FBI in many cases sort of tried to, I don't know whether you think fairly or not fairly, but they certainly tried to catch people, like motivate individuals to commit violent attacks probably much earlier than they otherwise would be, sort of pressing the button on a fake bomb so they could arrest and detain them. And that caused a lot of mistrust in the community and probably resulted in a number of individuals not getting identified early enough. So addressing perceptions, so people in the units need to understand that they need to respect these policies. They need to believe the policies are fair. The DoD needs to recognize, needs to keep their fingers on the pulse of that, just to make sure that they're communicating these policies in a way that meets muster. Really nice, Ann talked about off-ramping interventions. You know, these are interventions, whether they're cognitive behavioral therapy or others of the type that was mentioned, that Garret is working with folks to help them sort of walk away from this. These types of interventions are really, I would think can be helpful. We don't know, the evidence for this is anecdotal. I'm not aware of any prospective evaluations that look at this. However, we know a lot of people leave extremism. And a lot of people leave extremism in the ways that have been addressed in this briefing already, through support from individuals who have already been who have previously participated and then left extremist groups, through exposure to people like Dia Khan, and others who like all of a sudden open up their minds to how like off and wrong they've been in their views. So these interventions can be helpful. Many people say they've been really good for them. So the DoD needs to have some way of providing support and assistance to those it identifies or those that want help. Whether or not they get kicked out of the military, we don't address that as a policy recommendation per se. We just assume that they're going to be, because they're in clear violation of the Department of Defense policy. So unless things changes, that's what will happen. But where it does identify people and whether it intends to remove them or not, they do need to be offered counseling. They need to be offered some sort of off-ramping intervention to help them. We also argue that you need to help the families. Here, Reverted Parents for Peace, it's another organization that does CV related work. And they've done, they have a call line that people can call, and a lot of people call to address issues related to either their own extremism, but oftentimes it's the spouses of individuals who are calling to say, what do I do about this guy? Or this woman who's a dear family friend of mine, my husband, my wife, and they're knee deep in QAnon, they're knee deep in white supremacy. How can I help them? And I think the DoD needs to find a way to make that type of service available. And they probably need to do it in a way that does not necessarily dime out the individuals. So people should be able to get treatment. They should be able to get help through non-DoD channels. So it does not automatically be cause for their removal from the service. Military law enforcement training. This is just sort of a basic plug. Law enforcement is, as this issue is increasingly getting worse, possibly, the law enforcement needs to have training that's commensurate with that. And the commensurate with the types of investigations they'll be expected to do. And so, it's well known in the civilian sector that the U.S. has funded all sorts of different training programs to help law enforcement be better prepared to address extremism. And the DoD will need to do that as well. Finally, late phase interventions. We did not go through identifying late phase interventions, though I would say probably the most common is counseling that happens either in the prison setting after individuals have been arrested. And, we didn't speak to that, but certainly if the Department of Defense starts arresting individuals for violations of law on this issue, then they'll certainly need to think about what they do with them once they're incarcerated. So those are the main observations that we have. We tried to be limited in the scope of what we offered. We tried to suggest items that were not major revisions of the Department of Defense policy, but could fit within the Department of Defense policy. There's a lot that we don't know that could also be done. Certainly insider threat applications could be useful. For this study, we also looked at implicit bias training. And unfortunately, it's not, by most accounts, it does not appear to be effective. So this notion that which we hoped to find, that one could provide training, the Department of Defense maybe at basic or after basic or what have you, that could address. racist views or ideology. There's no silver bullet like that available yet. Finally, there's just a need for a lot more research on this. So kudos to Anna and her colleagues for doing the work that they did. And a lot more is going to be needed to really understand this problem. So, all right, that's the conclusion of my talk.
Oh, thank you, Todd. That was really amazing and such a compliment to what we presented. Thank you. So detailed and so thoughtful about, looking at what is the success rate of these various disinformation campaigns and so on. Thank you. So now we'd like to open it up to the floor, and if people have questions, you can put it in chat or say that you want to be called upon, and we'll open it up. And I wonder, TM, if you have any questions right from the start, since you've been in this world, how you see things.
Well, I agree with pretty much anything Todd Helmus had mentioned in his report. It is really important that you have to see what's happening in the military, what kind of interventions are there available, but also when people get expelled from the military, get kicked out, also then there needs to be some program that somebody has to set up, and it might be these off-ramp groups that are supporting that, offering something, because this is a typical problem for anybody who also leaves a white supremacist group, that they need a new support network. And this is why the videos, people get kicked out of the military, or leave the military for whatever reason. They're looking for the new support network that they can fall back into, and this are the hate groups that recruit them. And this is exactly why it happens. And even if somebody does not want to join these programs that Todd also mentioned in the military, because I think also if there's extremism detected in the military, these people should not get kicked out immediately. It needs to be determined how far is it going, how willing are they to listen, how willing are they to work on their problems. Is there a chance? You have always to see on this timeline of radicalization, you have different points. Nobody is going from 0 to 60 in like 2 seconds, That's a longer process in de-radicalization. It's a scientific process. It happens in your brains. But anyway, that has to be determined. Where are they in their radicalization process stage? And then you can decide, do we kick them out? Do we leave them in? And if you decide you kick them out, then you need to have some sort of group or some program that catches them when they get out, so the guys with the swastikas and the white hoods don't pick them up. So, because it's a perfect pipeline for violent extremists. You have extremism in the military, you kick them out, and they go straight to a hate group. And that needs to be addressed too. So there's many aspects. This is not a simple problem. It is very complex, as we see, and all these points have to be addressed.
So thank you, TM. We also have a question from Victoria Grodovich. She says, "Hi, Todd. Thank you for that very informative presentation. I was wondering if you could comment on the conditions of Patriot Wing, where QAnon insurrectionists are being held in prison. Do you know if any de-radicalization programs have been discussed for them?"
Well, I don't. I'm not aware of any. My guess is that there's probably two things that need to happen. One is just the way they're incarcerated probably needs to be changed so they're not with each other. I think it's a complex issue because you want to separate them from each other so they're not sort of building each other up as a cadre. But you also don't want them to be housed with other inmates so they're not radicalizing them. So it's a tricky issue, and I'm not an expert on prison management of extremists, but they need to navigate that. As far as de-radicalization, and I think this applies to the military as well, and maybe Anne can correct me, I'm not aware of any intervention that can de-radicalize somebody without them wanting to be de-radicalized. So people have to want to go through that process. Now, there are ways to help them. So, in drug abuse, there's motivational interviewing techniques, for example. Whereas, obviously, if someone doesn't want to quit using cocaine, you're not going to quit using cocaine, even but there are ways to talk with them to help them recognize the consequences that the cocaine or drug use has on their lives, and help them think about, wanting to quit. And then through that process, they might become more open to quitting, at which point you can start providing actual counseling therapy that would help them quit. And the same applies on extremism side, right? You need to do some sort of motivational interviewing to get people to recognize the problems and want to leave. And then you can sort of follow it up with sort of de-radicalization type interventions.
That's a good point. No, I'm going to jump in here first. Sorry. That's a good point. And I would say two things about that. One, when we lived in Belgium for 7 years, I had military members calling me up. I remember in particular this one calling me up because his son had taken his pistol that he had at home and ran to his room and threatened to commit suicide. And they came to me, even though I said, I'm not practicing, I don't have a license in Belgium. And they're like, no, we have to go to you. We have to go outside the system. So you brought this up about there should be a outside the system treatment that you can go to. And for me, that really worries me. Like, why are people with clearances in our government all afraid to go for treatment? Why are they afraid to get psychotropics, which a lot of people need? I mean, we live in a really anxiety prone information age now. A lot of people are on psychotropics. I think probably half our population is. And why are people inside a system not finding their own system responding to them? And then about the light bulb having to want to change. It's true, but it's also people that are in anything that's addictive tend to be less interested in what are the consequences of my behaviors, because they know that. They know it's bad for them. They know it's bad for other people, but it's serving them. So what you really have to get to with any of those people is, how is this serving you? What are your needs that need to be met? And could I offer you something better? Because as a therapist, I'm always like, oh, you're using A? Okay, I see. And what does it do for you? Oh, you can sleep now, and you can do this, you can do that. It makes you feel good about yourself. What about B? Would B replace A? Or how about C? Would you ever consider any of these other choices? And if I tell them A is bad for you, they don't want to give it up because it's meeting needs. And so anyway, I'll let you jump in now, T. I'm sorry.
No, it's perfect. It's perfect that you mentioned that, because this is exactly what I do. I use motivational interviewing in my interventions. And like as the name says, motivational, we motivate the person we're working with to start thinking about what they're doing. And you can do that in different ways. Like Todd Helmus said, you can put it out there, the consequence, make them think about it, and so they come to their own conclusions, what they're doing. And then they are motivated to think about it and then try to figure out a solution for that. But you also can do the other way and say, okay, what is it really what would benefit you instead, rather than what you're doing? So it's still the same effect that it has, and you can use either. And I'm doing that. And it depends on the individual. It also depends how scared they are to go to prison, for example. It works better to point out the consequences. But others that are really on the pilgrimage to look for their own, who they are, that's when you rather motivate them to think about what benefits them better than what they're doing. So, but that both can be used in motivational interviewing. I think it works great. I'm using it since about 2018, and it can be used in different ways.
We have another question from Miles Kagans, who I so deeply respect. Thank you, Miles, for your question. In your research about military veterans who participated in the January 6th insurrection, did all of them admit to being racist? Or are these insurrectionists mostly mad at the non-Trump federal government politicians? And that was really GWU's research. And then Todd mentioned another one. And let's see, we only have one person that we interviewed from the riots. And I would also just mention too, that I've heard of some treatment plans coming forward, and we've been asked maybe to be involved in some of them doing assessments. But I right away told the people, don't put hypnosis, don't put things that QAnoners or people that think the government's trying to control you would then use to try to say, hey, this is a legal challenge on thought control. But I don't know, Molly, do you have an answer for that? Do you know? It's a good question, Miles.
I think generally they're not admitting to being racist. I don't think that a lot of them see themselves as racist. But it's definitely going to be something that is addressed in their treatment if that treatment happens.
Okay.
I also want to point out that there are 2 people that have their hands raised, so I want to make sure that we don't miss.
Oh, go ahead and call on them. Oh, here we have Joe Plensler. Joe, go ahead, because I was just going to read your question. You can ask it yourself.
Hi, thanks. Yes, 2-part question. My first part is, have any of your research identified anything that DoD can better do to screen out members of domestic violent extremist groups prior to being enlisted in the military and working left of the bang? And then secondly, I'm just wondering if anyone's heard of anything that DoD plans to do in light of, I mean, we're soon going to put tens of thousands of service members potentially out on the streets, on the unemployment lines because of their failure to take the COVID vaccine, and they've fallen prey to that disinformation. So, we're potentially going to put a large number of people with military skills and experience out of the military soon. And I'm just wondering if you've heard of any discussions going on at DoD about what to do to prevent them from falling prey to extremist groups now that they've already fallen prey to disinformation about the COVID vaccine.
I think that's for you, Todd. That's a great question. Thank you, Joe.
Well, the first one's easier, maybe. I do know that the DoD has implemented a policy where they ask new entrants if they're members of extremist groups. So I don't know how far that will go, but they're asking now. I mean, I don't have easy answers. There's been suggestions that they would analyze people's social media histories. I think the DoD is looking at contractors to support that type. And there's probably 2 levels, right? One is at entrance, and then also when the people apply for their security clearances. And they probably need to monitor people at both those ends. So, but yeah, beyond, so I would imagine the background investigation for security clearances, they could do interviews that could shed light on that type of behavior. And they'll probably start including questions on extremism related to that, and then looking at their social media profiles. But otherwise, I'm not a real expert on that. As far as the anti-vaxxers go, yeah, that's a big problem. I don't know. It's I mentioned it's an empirical question. What percent of people who are anti-vax are also falling prey to some of these sort of extremist ideologies? My guess is there's a decent correlation there. But yeah, it's not even clear what the DoD policy is going to be with respect to these anti-vaxxers. Right now, they're talking about limiting pay for the Guard units. I'm not sure what they'll do for the active duty service members.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you both. And thank you, Todd, for that great answer. Eleanor Quina has his hand up. Would you like to speak or ask your question?
Thank you very much. Yes, my name is Eleanor Quina, and I'm listening and tuned in from Nairobi, Kenya. Thank you very much for the presentation. It's very insightful and informative, especially for the stakeholders in security management. I have briefly 2 questions. One, maybe I would like to know whether there is a study that has been conducted, or whether that study that was conducted on military could be applied on or extended to policing or prisons. Because taking an example of a case in Kenya, radicalization in armed forces is more in the police, and I say that with the disclaimer somehow, than the military. So my question is whether that study we can use those notes to do the same in the police and the prisons. And 2, I was wondering whether the study also, looking at the prevention, whether there's a, what do we call it? There's a response. Maybe the government has adapted your resolution so that maybe we can also use the same. Thank you very much.
Molly, do you want to speak to that a bit?
About police and prisoners and prisons? Yeah, I think that there's a lot of overlap, and there's been some great work done already on specifically white supremacism within police forces. I imagine that there are people doing the same work among correctional officers as well. But generally, a lot of these same issues kind of overlap in terms of the feeling of a noble cause, the brotherhood, the sense of patriotism that violent extremists can take advantage of in recruiting people in these types of jobs that all are related in some way or another to an idea of protection, because this is what a lot of them feel, is that they're protecting the country within the military or within the police or within the prison, and are then recruited by these violent extremists who say you're going to be doing the same thing with us.
Thank you, Molly. So we're almost to the end, and I just want to read out one comment, and then I'm going to give the rest of the panel a chance to say any last comments. Karen Reed notes that this might be a comment for consideration, that trauma-informed care and the integration of trauma-informed care with leadership, development, and mentorship programs within the military is a great idea to help. Oh, sorry, it's bouncing around and I can't see it anymore. Oh, it's a great idea to help with care cohesiveness and work towards getting a handle on how to get in front of extremism at the smaller unit level. I would add to that, as Todd already told us in his presentation, that you want to teach people, especially leaders, about the warning signs. So as we discussed, you want to weed people out by asking them questions right in the beginning, but there's many people that try to join violent extremists that try to join the military. They're going to hide it because they're going in with an objective, that they want weapons training, that they want access. So they're not going to admit to simple questions. So you do have to do an assessment continuously over time, and you have to have your leadership trained, and maybe even peer-to-peer trained to have some idea how to assess and intervene. We had this in the Marines for PTSD, of how to talk to a buddy about PTSD. So, you know, it's not inconceivable that that could be the same for extremism. But I'm going to stop there. And TM, do you have closing comments? Anything you'd like to add?
No, I think we covered pretty much everything. I would thank you, everybody who participated, Todd, for the great slides and your comments. We've just seen how important this work is, what we have to cover, what the DoD has to do, and I hope we can make a change here in the future. And we do that together.
Thank you. Todd, do you have anything else you'd like to say?
No, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for joining. We were so lucky.
Can I take his time, Anne? Since Todd is not saying anything, can I say something on his behalf?
No, sure, you can. And I was just going to apologize.
Thanks.
That we didn't get to the question.
Okay, thanks, Anne. I thank you for this for the panelists. You guys did a very excellent job there. But from my own perspective and from my experience, my understanding of working around people, violent extremist offenders, violent extremist groups, is different. And I don't want us to have a blanket approach to what we do, because over time I've got to realize that there are people who are violent extremist offenders, but what aggregates how I look at them depends on their slope into radicalization. Because one, there are people that are radicalized out of conviction. There are people that join the group not because they believe in the narratives or they're radicalized, but because they have ulterior motives. And I've seen that happen in Nigeria here with Boko Haram. Some people join simply because they want other kinds of benefit, financial, employment, women, and all of that. While there are a lot of the members of Boko Haram who have carried arms, who have committed atrocities because it is a way of keeping themselves alive. They use violence to keep you violent. So a lot of them join out of coercion. When they have a window, they want to get out. So if we start thinking because you have committed crimes, you have done this, we are going to be losing a lot of people that we could work with that come to the other side of the divide, and that could be a very useful source for us if we're trying to get to the bottom of it, and if we need to identify other people we're going to work with. And that's the challenge I've always had in working around this. But then, thank you. I don't want to keep us here.
As we're getting to our end, and I want to make sure
Yes.
Molly gets to say her last comments, but those were important points. And we do have to keep in mind how much the military spends to train every single person. And, you know, do you want to lose your members? Because they, especially now with QAnon, if they got caught up in QAnon and anti-vaxxer stuff and then, you know, move slowly on this trajectory towards violence, can we turn them back so we don't lose that investment in training? But anyway, Molly, do you have last comments that you would like to say?
No, I think we're right at time. And so I will just say thank you all so much for coming.
Okay, same here. Thanks, especially to you, Todd, for coming and sharing your report, which was absolutely excellent. Did we put it in the chat, how to get your report? And I hope you're going to share your PowerPoint with us. If you could just put the website of your report, or we'll be sure to add it later, because it was an excellent report. Thank you, TM. Thank you, Molly. And thank you for everybody that came and participated in the chat discussion. And hope to see you next time. Thank you. Have a good day. Bye-bye.